the Javier Novoa Podcast. Prosperity, liberty, and peace. Now, here's your host, Javier Novoa.
You get my point. What I'm saying is that there is, of course, many good reasons to do things for other people. But this idea that we should do it because we have a moral obligation to put others ahead of ourselves is not only unwise, it is stupid, and it is self-defeating. And it is also based on the idea that there are really unselfish people in this world, which is not true. I said earlier that everyone is seeking happiness. Now, the way that people seek happiness may differ from one person to another. One person thinks the way he's going to be happy is if he robs that bank and gets that $1 million and lives on the Riviera for the rest of his life. That's the way that he wants to try to satisfy his happiness. Somebody else wants to do it by building a business that provides products and services that people want, and he'll get in exchange for that the things that he needs in order to provide for his family and to do the things that he wants. Other people, like Mother Teresa, have decided that happiness is going to come to them from doing good works for other people. Let me bring it down from Kant a little bit to a bromide that I had drummed into me as a child, and maybe you've heard it. Happiness comes from making other people happy.
Oh, yes. Who hasn't heard it? And that's the trouble. Let's aim at the day when people will not hear it anymore. Because it isn't true. It isn't justifiable. And the first question you would have to ask is, why? Why is it good to want others to be happy, but not yourself?
That's right, guys. The great classic Ayn Rand, who wrote a book called The Virtue of Selfishness, which is required reading for every libertarian. I read it when I was a teenager. Many libertarians read it and internalized the message. Everybody else seems to think that we live for other people. I think it's a great way to start this show here on the 4th of July. I am Javier, your host, the real Javier Novoa. This is the Javier Novoa Podcast, aka the Insomnia Podcast. And we call it that because it is best watched with your favorite drink, probably at about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, especially if you can't sleep, because these are topics that are best taken into sleep. Happy 4th of July. And we're even going to question that because I'm going to read a little bit more of the truth behind the 4th of July. I'm going to give you some analysis that many people, especially these days, don't talk about because it seems unpatriotic. We're going to unpack it here on the Javier Novoa Podcast. So buckle your seatbelts for that. At any rate, today I want to talk about freedom. You see, everything that we do on our channel, whether it's the podcast, whether it's the videos, whether it's talking about spirituality and perennialism, it's actually geared so that you will live free. And another book recommendation, one of the best books written about this topic, was by another libertarian, Harry Browne, who was a candidate for president of the United States in the early 2000s. He wrote a book called How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World. It's an incredible book. We're going to walk you through just a few small passages of it, and we're going to tell you how you can be free this year, how you can declare your own Independence Day. We're going to actually go into a little bit of the goal of freedom, and then we'll get into some of the means. But on my channel, we have a lot of videos about the means of being free. So you can peruse those, and you can just stick around in the podcast for a little bit of that. First, I just want to go into a little bit of the news here on this 4th of July. It is very early in the morning. By the way, guys, I'd recommend for all of you, you'll probably be watching this too late anyway, don't go out the night before the 4th of July. I was driving around. I was trying to get home as early as possible, and I almost got into a car accident 2 times. Someone ran a red light. People were driving crazy. For some reason, the red lights didn't work around the highways around where I live. So I just recommend, don't go out on 4th of July. Don't go out on New Year's. Stay home. And if you can, watch the Insomnia podcast. So what's going on today in the world? Unfortunately, guys, the bad news is that this big, hideous bill actually did pass. The Republicans that we were talking about last night, who were holdouts on the bill, sold out. The holdouts sold out. And I think many of them were threatened with being primaried in the next election if they did not go along with the bill. Many of them were offered some perks, I assume, but the bill is passed, and that's fine. We have to live within the constraints of what's given us, and living free is about navigating those constraints, even prospering through those constraints. And a lot of aspects of this show will be about how to prosper in the coming circumstances, in the coming scenarios, no matter what happens. Here's an interesting one, guys. We were talking about AI last night, and Phoenix Capital Research has an article out. The next round of AI-induced layoffs is here. The artificial intelligence revolution, if successful, will be extremely deflationary. Guys, this is the good news. Deflationary. What does that mean? It means everything's going to be dirt cheap. And while I don't think this is going to move in the linear fashion that people are predicting or projecting, because we always make predictions based upon the framework in which we are. And if you've watched our more mystical videos, you'll realize that there are time frames and there are timelines and there are different dimensions. We're not going to go too deeply into that in the Insomnia podcast, at least not in this one. We might dedicate one to all of those spiritual matters, but you can watch the videos on the real Javier Novoa that go deeply into that. But these predictions are assuming that other things will be equal. Other things are never completely equal. Of course, in economics, we call this ceteris paribus. The ceteris are never paribus. So I don't think this is going to happen as linear fashion as they're saying it's going to happen. But yes, it will be deflationary for many immediate items, for many immediate products. A lot of products are going to become cheap. I was reading a diagram about all of the different AI enterprises that were founded last year, many of them by China, like Manu, like DeepSeek, and each iteration got super cheaper. Like one was $1 billion, then one was $100 million, one was $20 million. All of these iterations are getting cheaper. Of course, it's going to depend a lot on computing power. It's going to depend a lot on the data, because all of this is depending on massive data centers. So there are physical factors involved, but things are getting cheaper. Keep that in mind, because I think this is going to be instrumental to actually living free. Because what does it mean? It means the old view of Lysander Spooner in the 19th century. For those who don't know, Lysander Spooner was a great libertarian in the 19th century, and he actually tried to set up a business to compete with the post office, wasn't able to do it, but he had a vision that every man, every person could have his own small business. I believe that we're getting to the point where that's possible. Tim Ferriss, the 4-hour work week, he talked about hiring a virtual assistant. What if you don't have to hire a virtual assistant? What if you can have, for pennies on the dollar, something like an AI agent? We are definitely looking into that. We're going to be having videos on that. But back to this article here. We previously noted that numerous Fortune 500 companies are announcing large-scale layoffs. And again, this is a testament to the selfishness of these companies. They don't care about you. They don't care about their employees. So stop being beholden to them. A lot of people are even curtailing their freedoms. They're self-censoring. They're not speaking their minds. They're not speaking their truth. They're not living the life of their dreams. even many people who have a lot of money saved up, because they're beholden to these corporations. While these corporations will just brush you off in the twinkling of an eye, ladies and gentlemen, once you're no longer necessary to that machine. It is a machine. So keep that in mind. And don't lose any sleep about immediately becoming free from this corporate structure, which I believe is going away anyway. And many people who I've interviewed on this very channel talked about the fact that it is a model that's quickly perishing. And I think for the good of society. Procter & Gamble is laying off 7,000 people, roughly 15% of its non-manufacturing staff. Microsoft announced it will be firing 6,000 people, most of them managers, and that's good riddance, because a lot of these managers, their positions have been completely unnecessary for many years, but they're simply there due to favors and kickbacks and so on and so forth. So I'd say good riddance. But if you're a manager, that's not going to be immediately good for you. That's why becoming free is going to be a priority. Walmart has said it is laying off 1,500 positions in sales, tech, and advertising. Why do you need tech when this AI self-programs? Of course, you're going to still need people on the creative side, but these people who are just going along to get along are going to be displaced, unfortunately. This is just the beginning. Ford CEO recently claimed AI could replace half of all white-collar jobs in the U.S. Amazon CEO Andy Jassy has told employees to Amazon will be shrinking its corporate workforce dramatically due to AI. And Shopify, Fiverr will not be firing anyone until they're certain that AI cannot do the job. And Microsoft just announced a second wave of layoffs, 9,000 workers. This is all deflationary, both in the good sense and the bad sense. The good will be that goods and services will be cheaper due to increases in productivity. The bad is that AI will also reduce incomes and result in higher unemployment. Indeed, unless all these CEOs are just pontificating, it's quite possible the job force will look totally different in 5 years. Now, here are the probable scenarios. A lot of people will lose their job, but that will lead to, of course, companies reducing their expenditure, and they can invest that money in more capital production. So all in all, there will be more production, so goods will be very cheap. So I see in the not so long-term future that everybody's work hours could be reduced. It depends on how we play this as a society. Elon Musk said not too long ago that we're not going to be looking at a universal basic income. We're going to be looking at a universal high income. And that is welcome, ladies and gentlemen, because it means that you're going to be able to craft your life in the way that you please to craft it a lot sooner than many people thought. Of course, this is a double-edged sword, because what's going to happen in the interim? And what's going to happen to society in the interim depends on how we play it. Now, we see with people like Mamdani in New York, socialism gaining traction. Why? Because right now, people are not able to afford their basic needs. Even very educated people, well, quote unquote educated according to the system. So what are we going to do? Government's going to have to do something in the interim or risk societal unrest. Now, what can I do and what can people watching this podcast do? We can position ourselves, guys. There's still time to position oneself. And of course, we make a lot of recommendations. One of the best recommendations that we can make to position yourself is to educate yourself on some assets, whether that be crypto, because I've made a good amount of money in Bitcoin over the last 2 years, and I think it still has a ways to go up. Michael Saylor thinks that it's like buying a piece of New York real estate in the 19th century. If that's the case, you can position yourself to make a windfall. You can make small changes in your life now to adapt to freedom. And that's what we're going to be talking about very briefly with Harry Brown's book, that I'm just going to look at some passages of that. So keep this in mind, guys. For us, for viewers of the Insomnia podcast, this is actually simply another goad, another push, if you will, to actually make that commitment to live fully free. It's not like 20 years ago where everyone's going to be beholden to a corporation. Of course, many people are still in that mindset. I can't believe how many young people are still in the mindset of going to work for this corporation and we're going to get benefits. There are going to be no corporate benefits there, but I blame the education system. And I also see AI as able to counter this education system by democratizing. You no longer have to spend $80,000, $100,000 on university. You can learn this stuff on your own through AI and through a lot of free resources. So, but a lot of young people are still in this trap. A lot of older people are in this trap. Well, you don't have much longer left in the current system. People have been talking about this for years, and it's finally coming to pass. Again, I don't think AI is going to be this huge existential threat. I don't think it's going to change the nature of what it actually means to be human. Although if it does, there's possibility it might, if not probability, then we have to make the decision that we're going to remain human no matter what. And Greg Braden, the great scientist and spiritual author, talks about this in his book, Human, or I believe it's called 100% Human or Fully Human. I have to look up the title. But barring that, I believe this is a great opportunity for everyone to readjust. And all it takes in the beginning, guys, is a psychological readjustment. And we're going to talk about that here in a little while. After 8 hours of hogwash from Representative Jeffries, Hakeem Jeffries, who in this case I agree with, House Republicans passed Trump's big, beautiful bill. We talked about it already. This was earlier today, and President Trump is due to sign that bill on the 4th of July, today, this afternoon. The Republican response to Democrat leader Hakeem Jeffries, of course, guys, I have to address this whole issue of right wing, left wing. I think it is a very stupid pigeonholing of positions, and the time for it to be swept under the rug has come. We see a lot of populists, see a lot of left populists and right populists. We have even left libertarians and right libertarians. And if truth be told, I could consider myself more of a left libertarian because I err on the side of the common people. And I believe the original libertarians did err on the side of the common people. Of course, they didn't call themselves libertarians. They called themselves liberals. These were classical liberals and also anarchists and so on. But this whole divide between right and left has become a little bit nonsensical, especially being that the Democrats claim to be on the left and yet are now the party that is against free speech. The Democrats claim to be on the left and now seem to be the party of war. And of course, the Republicans have that. So I think young people very soon are going to discard this whole notion of right and left. And we're going to actually divide ourselves, if you will, between rational and irrational, between servants to power and servants to reason, or servants to soul or spirit. That's going to be what's going to set people apart here in the future. This Republican-Democrat split, it's a fossil, just like the corporations, just like the corporate structure. I believe it's going to dissolve sooner than a lot of us think. And good riddance. Anyway, I come from the show me state, Representative Jason Smith retorted. And what we just heard can be defined in one word. A bunch of hogwash is what we've heard for 8 hours on that side of the building. Of course, the two holdouts to this bill, Rand Paul and Thomas Massie, still stand their ground. While it looks like the Republican Party in Congress has just become a rubber stamp for Trump. They're just going to do whatever Trump says. And therefore, it takes away the rationality or justification for even electing representatives. Why not just do away with it altogether if we're going to just do whatever the leader says? sounds more like North Korea to me than the United States. CCP leaders propose regulation to rein in Xi's super agencies. And there was actually a book years ago called Understanding China. It's by an American China scholar. And of course, this was either in the beginning of the reign of Chairman Xi, or it was before it. And he talked about the fact that actually people think that power in China is very centralized. And it has indeed become more centralized over the last decade with this Xi Jinping and his dictatorial tendencies, who Trump, by the way, said that he would like to have that same power, the same ability to be president for life. He actually said this years ago, but when Xi was elected president for life. But in actuality, the system of China is a lot more complex, and it depends a lot more on local government and local parties. Of course, that brings in the whole aspect of boss hog corruption, but it is not as totalitarian as many people think. That's the whole point. And we see this now with the party reining in Chairman Xi. China's top leaders are proposing new rules to regulate a set of powerful commissions and groups established nearly a decade ago by Communist Party chief Xi Jinping to centralize power. Proposed regulation was reviewed on June 30th during a closed-door meeting of the Politburo, the party's second highest decision-making body. Summary of the meeting, published by state mouthpiece Xinhua News Agency, stated that the aim is to regulate these commissions' establishments, responsibilities, and operations. Of course, there are a lot of people involved, and these people, of course, are looking to the future. Xi is, of course, becoming older, and they're now jockeying for who's going to be in charge in the future. They're building their networks, and so they want to have a little more autonomy to be able to maneuver there. I think it's just human nature. It's Machiavellian. That's what's happening in China. Just goes to prove that a dictatorship cannot last for very long, and a dictatorship can only last if it actually has support of the nodes of power in society. A dictator actually depends on other nodes of power. Many societies, that could be the church, that could be the business elite, but without the support of nodes of power, in Middle Eastern countries, is the tribes, like in Libya under Gaddafi, it was the tribes. And when they lose that, they no longer have a dictatorship. Just an interesting aspect to note there. We've become serfs on our own land. The USDA trap, foreign land sales, and the collapse of American farming. Of course, we know that big corporations have been buying up farms. Big corporations have been buying up doctors' offices. I see now that almost all of the doctors come from UT Southwestern, come from these huge conglomerates, as opposed to the private doctors. And I think this is something that would not be possible in a libertarian society, because again, the only way a conglomerate can become so large is through government support or regulations. There are barriers to entry for the smaller guy. You've got to get so many permits, you've got to get insurance, and the only people who can afford that, of course, are people who can sell in mass on scale. And so only the big guys survive. And of course, that leads to a tyranny, guys, because we only have a few nodes of power. They will cooperate. And unfortunately, as Adam Smith said, and a lot of quote unquote capitalists don't quote this, I am a capitalist, but a true capitalist. He said that whenever two businessmen are in a room discussing, you can be sure that it's going to be something that's not good for the public. Federal officials warn of lone wolf terror threats on July 4th, New York governor says. I'm not going anywhere, guys. I'd recommend that you not go anywhere. It's just, I love, socializing and so on and so forth. Of course, I have things to do. I'm busy. But New Year and 4th of July, It's just a risk that to me seems unnecessary. Stay home with your family. If you want to drink at home, watch it on TV. I'd say take it past this year. That's just me. We hope this doesn't happen. New York Governor Kathy Hochul has confirmed the federal officials informed her about a possible terrorist threat ahead of the July 4th Independence Day holiday. Of course, they could just be saying this for some kind of agenda. Who knows? Our federal partners reiterated yesterday that lone wolf actors remain the greatest potential threat, including during the upcoming July 4th holiday, not to mention the drone skies. So, 4th of July, is it a legitimate holiday? And I always go back to the classic libertarian sources. There was a great author, of course, with whom I had a lot of disagreements, but who had a lot of works in economic theory based upon the Bible, and he was affiliated with the Mises Institute. It was none other than Gary North. And Gary North wrote an article, this was in 2011. I just want to read a little bit of it. The 4th of July was really a farce, ladies and gentlemen, and researchers have gone on to this. You see, the British early on saw that the colonies wanted to be independent. So a lot of them said, well, let's just let them be independent. Let's let them have it. We'll put up some token resistance, then we'll surrender. But what we will do is we will maintain control of their financial systems. And if you go into the research, you'll see that all of the major banks in the United States were either founded by, are financed by, or have some ownership interest by the City of London, which is the financial center of the British Empire. See, the British Empire never disappeared, simply went underground, just like many authors say the Soviet Union never disappeared, it just went underground. And so 4th of July was not a true Independence Day. It was simply a shuffling of the power from overt power to underground power. And we see a lot of this with actually the tax structure. Gary North is arguing here that we actually shot ourselves in the foot by declaring independence and fighting Britain. He said, I do not celebrate the 4th of July, nor really do I. This goes back to a term paper I wrote in graduate school. It's on colonial taxation in the British North American colonies in 1775, not counting local taxation. I discovered that the total burden of British taxation was about 1% of the national income. It may have been as high as 2.5% in some of the colonies. Today, we're paying 50%. And we're talking about a taxation of, at its height, 2.5%. In 2008, Alvin Rabushaka's book of almost 1,000 pages appeared, Taxation in Colonial America. He goes on, the colonials, or the colonists, had a sweet deal in 1775. Great Britain was the second freest nation on earth. Of course, if you think about the fact that classical liberalism really had its flowering in Great Britain with people like Adam Smith, with people like John Locke, even with economists like David Ricardo and others, with philosophers. Of course, the Austrians know it started earlier than that, actually in Catholic Spain, in La Universidad de Salamanca, with many Jesuit priests and Franciscan priests and professors who actually independently discovered the laws of economic functioning and economic thought. And you can read a lot of their books, and also expatiated upon human freedom. Some of the first people to actually write against slavery were monks like Bartolomé de las Casas, who was a Spanish monk. This was before the British got hold of this, but nevertheless, the British did get hold of these via France and via other colonial philosophies, and it did flower in Britain. So Great Britain was the second freest nation on earth. Switzerland was probably the most free nation, Gary North says. But I would be hard-pressed to identify any other nation at 1775 that was ahead of Great Britain. And in Great Britain's empire, the colonists were by far the freest. So if you see that they had all these freedoms, what was that revolution about? And it's going to be a lot deeper than the pay grade of this podcast. Goes into Freemasonry. It goes into secret combinations and so on and so forth. We could do a whole podcast on that. I will say it loud and clear, the freest society on earth in 1775 was British North America, with the exception of the slave system, of course, a horrific anomaly that it took us a little while to get rid of. Anyone who's not a slave had incomparable freedom. Jefferson wrote these words in the Declaration of Independence: that the history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. Gary North says, I can think of no misleading political assessment. The point is that we paid a lot fewer taxes under Great Britain. So is the 4th of July a celebration of an unnecessary, perhaps vilely rooted revolution? I'll leave that for your consideration. But the important thing is your freedom, our freedom. Trump, with his misguided tariffs, declared a second Independence Day. But what would it mean to declare an Independence Day in your life, in my life? It's what my channel's all about. It's what this podcast's all about. It's why we're going into investing. But you can't be totally free unless you escape the traps. Even wealthy people are beholden to traps. And I just want to go a little bit into this book, How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World, by the great libertarian candidate for president, Harry Browne. There are many traps, guys, and we put ourselves into this trap. It's like every motivational speaker and self-help speaker in history has talked about the elephant who is guarded in his place by this wood stake. Of course, when he was a baby, they put him on this wood stake, and he was small and he could not escape from it. And as he grew up, he simply became accustomed to the fact that he could not escape that wood stake, and so he stayed on there. Many of us stay tied to that wood stake all our lives. It's from past traumas. It's from things that we learned when we were children, but we've never released them. On our channel, we talk about methods to release it, and perhaps we'll discuss these in another podcast. But it's very simple. You observe your emotions, you allow them to flower, and you allow them to pass through you, and you release them, and then you're free. You're free to pursue what you want. There are a lot of traps. We think, oh, we can't do this because society doesn't allow it. Oh, my family would never approve of this. These are all traps. And Harry Browne talks about, he says, identity traps. There are two identity traps: the belief that you should be someone other than yourself, and the assumption that others will do things the way you would. Abraham Hicks talks about the art of allowing. You have to live the way you want, and you have to allow others to live the way they want. That's living free. And on our channel and through these podcasts, we'll talk about a model for you building a free life, because it's not only freedom from a job and a boss, which is foundational, which is huge, but the first freedom starts within freedom within yourself. I still see so many employees, guys. I see high-paid employees, quote-unquote educated employees, who still feel like tied to their job, and they say, well, I'm supposed to do this. There's no supposed to. You're not owing any sort of loyalty to people who you work for. You're doing it because it's necessary now, but a lot of people don't speak their truth because they think, oh, well, it's improper to do something for someone that I work for. Who put this person over you as a boss? The only reason they're a boss is because they have an economic advantage over you. But a lot of these people, even when they get an economic advantage, they're still tied down to a boss. If you're tied down to a boss and you have loyalty to a boss, you will never be free. You have to be mentally free before you can be physically free. He talks about how you're different. It's a beautiful book, ladies and gentlemen. And what he goes into the fact that, first of all, you build your personality as a free personality. You cut these ties with others, whether it be family members, whether it be leaders, whether it be political leaders, religious leaders, organized religion, which is a huge one. And you establish that you are enough. One of the drawbacks of organized religion, and believe me, I've been in my share of organized religions, is that they're constantly telling you you're not enough. Of course, every religion has a spiritual core that is valid and is beautiful, and it will make you free. It's called the perennial philosophy. But the structures of these religions are built by a priesthood basically to be gatekeepers between you and this knowledge. It's like the tree of good and evil. But once you get this knowledge, you realize who you are and you are free. So it leads you to question, why are there gatekeepers? So to me, organized religion has just become a hollow shell. We have to find the spirituality which is behind these organized religions. That will make you free. But if you're beholden to an organized religion, I've just become soured on religious people, because in the world, the shall we say, the circles that I swim in, I see so many religious people who are unhappy. I see so many religious people who are depending on chemicals and drugs. I see so many religious people who are in therapy. And if you have the truth, you would not be in therapy. You would not be unhappy. And of course, this is not medical advice, but I've known people who've been in therapy for 20 years and it doesn't seem that they change. And I think they don't change because the therapist will just let them air their grievances and listen to them, but they won't tell them that you have to be independent of the outer world. You cannot expect the outer world to conform to what you want. Of course, it will conform once you discover who you are, but you cannot depend on the outer world. I see so many people in therapy who depend on the outer world. I see so many religious people who depend upon the outer world. Well, then it's just lost its purpose, guys. So you have to claim your own divinity. You have to claim your own freedom. You have to declare your own independence. And the most powerful part of this book by Harry Brown is where he talks about getting yourself out of a trap. A lot of us are in boxes, whether it's marriage, whether it's an abusive family situation, whether it's a job that we don't like, and we can't seem to get out of those boxes. What Harry Brown teaches us to do is, and what many self-help authors taught us to do, and spiritual writers, you first ask yourself, what's the price I have to pay? There's always a price for your freedom. There's always a price that you can pay to get free. Now, that's not to say that you have to pay it. And this can get very metaphysical, and I talk about that in my other videos. But just from a very hard-nosed, practical perspective, what's the price I have to pay? Well, it might be that I have to spend 8 hours a day looking for another job. Or it might be I have to go and try to develop this skill so that I can have another income stream. Or part of it may be I have to move into this apartment with a roommate. So what you do is you recognize that cost. And then you resolve to pay it. And you sort of figure out how you're going to pay it, or how you're going to make yourself be able to pay it by whittling it down a little bit. Well, I can do this to make it easier. I can maybe take another job to make this easier. So what we call on our channel, and many other videos we've called smoothing out the film roll that you're on. And so then you're ready to pay that price. And you pay that price and you realize you're out of that box. And that's real growth. That's the essence of this book called How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World. I'd recommend all of you read it. If you're going to celebrate an Independence Day, especially a fake Independence Day, it's okay to celebrate. I mean, it's fun to go to fireworks and stuff, but just know that it's all a game that's just being played by the elites to think, oh, we're a country and so on and so forth. There's no country or nation state. We're all one global people. We're all one global citizenry. The Stoics knew this. The great philosophers knew this. It's called cosmopolitanism. And that's not to advocate for a one world order. Absolutely not. We still have autonomy, but we know that we're not separate from other people. But if you want to celebrate independence, guys, celebrate your own independence. Celebrate your own freedom and have the courage, have the resolve to go within and figure out what is preventing you from stepping into your freedom. But before that, pour yourself another drink, have fun. You can watch another Insomnia podcast or some other videos on YouTube. Have a good time. If you went to fireworks, hope you had a good time. I hope you guys have a very safe, wonderful holiday. It is July 4th, 2025. I am the real Javier Novoa. You are watching the Javier Novoa podcast, aka the Insomnia podcast. Thanks for watching, guys. If you appreciate this material, please do hit the subscribe button, like the videos, share the videos, and I will see you tomorrow night. Stay safe, stay free.